This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode, I have Laura Loe from Share the Cities. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Could you tell me just a little bit about Share the Cities?
Share the Cities is a group of folks that care a lot about climate change and housing and transportation and tenant rights, that we've all known each other for a few years and worked kind of ad hoc on different housing issues. And we came together around the Fort Lawton housing for permanently supportive senior housing and Habitat for Humanity housing. And after that, kind of we're looking to, meet more regularly as a kind of a group of a collective of organizers that do other work around the city. And an article came out in the Seattle Times that they were going to build 60 really fancy suburban style homes, which we call McMansions. That's a word that's been used across the United States for kind of these suburban style homes in the middle of urban environments at Tulare, which is right now a conference center. It's near Children's Hospital. It's near neighborhoods that have very frequent transit, within like a mile of light rail, near a lot of amenities and jobs at the UW and the University Village. And we were kind of, from a climate and a housing affordability standpoint, really upset by that, and started meeting under the name Affordable Tulare. Realized that because it's private property, and because the city had declared, like in the previous city council had said no rezones there, that we weren't going to make progress. So we started moving up the light rail spine, ended up looking at Roosevelt Reservoir as a large land parcel where development without displacement could happen. That got, they decided they need that to fight fires. Moved up the light rail spine again. You got Northgate. There's a lot of folks working on Northgate. We kind of wanted to work on something where no one else is working. There's 130th. There's a group of folks that have been organizing there. Made it all the way up to 145th. Realized that Shoreline is doing amazing work around a sub-area plan for 145th light rail at the border between Shoreline and Seattle. But on the Seattle side, nothing has happened at all. Not even a really good discussion about the sidewalk on our side, much less any housing conversations. So we were like, let's do that. No one else is doing that. And in that discussion, we've kind of become, unfortunately, known as the golf course group because there's a golf course right there. And so Share the Cities works on big land parcels to look at development without displacement and open space equity, and really just trying to do reproducible, equitable outreach and model that for other communities that maybe they could copy what we're doing.
So for you personally, what really motivates your interest in these topics?
It's so many things. It's I've been a renter in Seattle for 10 years, and I've experienced what that's like in terms of big power imbalances. So I get really motivated by kind of systemic injustices, either around like environmental justice and racial equality, equity issues. I did a lot of immigration rights organizing when I lived in Chicago. And food justice work. And so I kind of see it as like a fairness issue. So I see a lot of unfairness around land use. And I think there's things that we could do that we just need the political will to do it. That wouldn't be that hard, that could kind of make things more fair for people that have long been left out of kind of the prosperity of our city or the prosperity in the United States.
So instead of just being angry about something, you're actually out there, gathering people together and trying to make change happen.
Yes, I feel I fell into this work after I had been a campaign manager for a slow growth candidate. Slow growth is kind of someone that's like very into the Seattle process and uses a lot of words that I've learned to mean are often hiding true motivations. So talking a lot about like, neighborhoods and process, as when a lot of times what people are talking about is we think our city is full and we don't want one more person coming. And there's a lot wrong with that. So being the campaign manager for that candidate 6 months and every day waking up and feeling like this is not my values, I think that at the end of that, I was like, how am I going to undo some of the damage here? And I learned through that process what I believed. And I learned that I did not agree with that candidate. So that was an interesting experience.
Well, that kind of brings up kind of a cliche question, but have you ever thought about running for office yourself?
I have. I was about a month out of moving out of District 4 into District 7 when the appointment process was going on. So I think I would have been, if I still lived in District 4, I would have probably applied for that. I think long term, I'm not the kind of person that likes to sit. I was a bus driver for a year and a half. I've been a school teacher. I like jobs where I'm outdoors, and so community organizing is a good fit with my personality. And sitting there 40 hours a week and listening at council, I don't know if that's the right job for me. So, but yeah, I would have been curious to be a part of the process for running for office, to elevate the issues that I care about and to kind of highlight things that maybe other candidates aren't highlighting. Like, I'm very frustrated with my new district, District 7. I just don't feel like any of the candidates are speaking to my values.
Yeah, there's kind of that eternal struggle of, can you do more good inside or outside?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how many days away from being qualified to run in District 7, but I would have run knowing that there's no way that I would have had a chance of winning. Like, just my precinct, I think, went 70-something% for Durkin, and I'm pretty left. And District 7, especially around Queen Anne, Magnolia, Inner Bay, is not very, it's pretty conservative. So,
well, the city council race is pretty unique. I think we're at, I think Crosscut reported 57 different people running. It's quite a crowded field.
Yeah. It's so funny because I am so ambivalent about the districted system. Like, I think that there's people running and voices that you never, ever would hear from if it was just citywide. But at the same time, in terms of governing, I think it's a problem when council members just kind of super hyper focus on their district and they don't zoom out and see, like, there's a District 7 candidate who's really focusing on a new fancy community center for Queen Anne. Meanwhile, there's parts of the city that don't have a community center at all. And so the districted council members, it's frustrating to me in terms of like budgeting and allocating resources across the whole city in a fair way. When people run in their district, they can kind of pretend they don't see that level. And that's frustrating to see. But there are people running like Melissa Hall in District 6 that, would never run citywide. And so you have these really like kind of unique voices that we get to hear from during the process.
And the democracy vouchers have helped quite a bit. People who don't necessarily have deep pockets themselves or rich friends. There's a lot more people who felt that, well, maybe I can do this now.
Yes, it's quite an experiment. I'm also ambivalent about that. I'm ambivalent about,
yes.
When it comes to some of those things, I'm so ambivalent. Like, I think it does more good than harm, but it's such a low amount. Like $75,000 for the primary is really restricting what, in terms of like a fair workplace environment, like making sure that those few staff that are there on the campaign are getting paid a fair wage or a living wage or being able to get benefits. That takes up a big chunk of that $75,000.
Yes, I totally agree there. I mean, it's a good first step. I mean, I would really like to see it expanded much, much further. But yeah, it has been nice just talking to people who just say, I wouldn't be able to do this without that, even if it in the end won't be enough, just that it got so many more voices included that would not have felt the ability.
Definitely. Yeah. No, it's super exciting. And it's sort of like a pre-vote. It's super interesting. And No, it's the right direction. We're in the right direction. My group, Share the Cities, is not a nonprofit, but we're not an organization that is doing endorsements. We're not, we're, like I said, we're a collective of organizers that do a lot of other organizing, and a lot of those folks are in organizations that are not allowed to endorse. So some of the stuff I said so far was as with my Laura hat on, just to be clear. I have to be careful. My Share the Cities hat is very curious about what candidates have to say about affordable housing, policing, homeless sweeps, and kind of indigenous rights and equitable development funding, like looking at beefing up the equitable development initiative. So I can speak on behalf of my group and say those are kind of a lot of the priorities of the folks that I organize with is kind of a social justice, urbanist, holistic view of a vision of the city.
Yeah, it's the kind of the issues you would like to see the candidates talking more about.
What I would want to see more, just more awareness around the equitable development initiative from candidates that are in neighborhoods that are wealthy, like District 7, District 6. You don't hear a lot of that, unfortunately. Again, they're so focused on their district, they're not zooming out to like the very high rates of displacement for communities of color in the South End and how the prosperity in their district is connected. So I don't hear any of that, or barely any of that. And I think that that's frustrating. You hear a lot of it in District 4. It's really fascinating. District 4, I feel like, has kind of, I think, the model discussion going on that needs to be happening in the rest of the district in terms of a balance between business interests and, community interests and aesthetics versus parking versus getting people to live without cars. So I think that more District 4 in the other districts.
Seems like the city is becoming more and more polarized. So oftentimes I think along the lines of like renters versus homeowners. As someone who does a lot of organizing, how do you deal with that?
Look for mutual shared values like libraries and grocery stores and community centers and things that benefit everybody regardless of like if they rent or they own, and really focusing on community amenities, like whether somebody has a small business or they're, a low-income renter or a long-time homeowner. They like up by Jackson Park, up by 145th, they want to be able to walk down 145th and not be afraid. It's like people go down there, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. There's 4 lanes. It's really intimidating, and the light rail is going to open in less than 5 years. And how are people going to get there? So I think regardless of who you are, if you're going to be trying to access light rail along 145th, you want the same things. Like you want to be able to push a stroller on a nice day and go downtown. You want to be able to ride your bike to the station. You want cool stuff at the station when you get there. Like if you're coming home, a lot of people said they want to see like a restaurant or a pub. So our group went and knocked on doors and we asked people, how do you plan to get to the light rail station? What do you want to see there? A lot of people, we should have started off and just said, do you know light rail is coming? Do you know when it's coming? Because we found out a lot of people didn't know it was coming, or they were confused about when it was coming, because the 130th may come in 2030, or it might come sooner in 2024. And so a lot of people didn't realize that just over the border and shoreline, 1 block, there was a station coming pretty soon. So most people are focused on Northgate because that's going to happen sooner. But so it was kind of fun to deliver that news. And if people answered the door with their kid, they would turn to their kid and they'd be like, oh, you're like 5 now, but when you're 10, you're going to have a light rail station that you can walk to. And then they looked at me and they're like, ooh, 146 isn't so fun to walk on. They're imagining their 10-year-old walking to light rail. And it's like, we're putting these kind of things in their mind that haven't even been there. Like they haven't even jumped to imagining that future. So that's kind of it's a fun space to work in.
So if you had your way, what would the city look like in like 10 years?
Um, I think Roosevelt I'm a little biased, but because I was the editor of the Roosevelt Neighborhood Association newsletter back in like 2012. But I think that Roosevelt really created a pilot for how transit-oriented communities should not only develop, but how those conversations should go. Their newsletter is hand-delivered by like 30 or 40 blockheads to neighbors. The newsletter goes out monthly, and it's very dense in terms of information and letting folks know in the community how to access government and the terms around land use. They did a land use academy that was like maybe 10 or 12 hours of information about land use. And so when it came time to do the Roosevelt transit-oriented development, they got deep affordability from 2 different affordable housing developers. They partnered with local students, both like I think high school students and college students. And it was just such a collaborative, kind of healthy discussion compared to what we normally see, not just in Seattle, but in Toronto, in Brisbane, Australia, all across the world. So the kind of homeowner versus renter and longtime Seattleite versus new Seattleite, like all of those friction points, we see that across the whole country. So I do organizing on an international level. And if you think of the cast of characters of people in Seattle, like Teresa Mosqueda and John Grant and Bill Bradford, and like kind of, you think of that cast of characters, there's those people in every city having the same conversation around parking and traffic and aesthetics and new ugly buildings and who has a right to the city. Like it's the same conversation in so many growing places. So I think that also helps like my group and myself stay like positive and knowing that these conversations aren't personal. These are just the conversations that people are having everywhere.
And do you have any tips for folks that are, they want to be more engaged, but they don't even know where to start?
Yeah, I would tell them, 2 really good resources would be Real Change and The Urbanist. And they both have like both daily and weekly content. And, Real Change is a physical paper that people can pick up from vendors and they can, and there's a lot of stuff in there around all sorts of issues. The Urbanist has more of a focus on transit and land use, but there are transit and land use articles in Real Change too. And I think those are good entry points for people that kind of want to maybe not engage in the online kind of things get very heated and complicated in like online forums. And then in terms of showing up in real life, the Urbanist hosts a monthly meetup. There's also Housing Development Consortium, which is affordable housing providers. They do events that are very informational. There's Puget Sound Sage, which has a really strong focus on equitable development, especially for South King County and South Seattle residents. So I would say those are kind of like trusted news sources for, accurate information instead of just kind of maybe reading some angry person on Nextdoor, which is not going to help you. Like there is good information on Nextdoor. Like I've actually used it very successfully for a broad range of things, but it is not the place to go discuss land use.
Yeah, well, I'm on First Hill, and our Nextdoor is very strange. It's not a very positive environment.
Yes. Right. And First Hill has an amazing organization focused on the future of that community. And they're doing some exemplary work around getting residents involved in those conversations about the future and hosting workshops. And but yeah, like, so I would just say, but showing up in real life is a big barrier for a lot of people. So I think reaching out to me, like I meet with a lot of people one-on-one for coffee, and I try to be really clear if I'm giving them information that I think might be biased or unbiased, and directing them to other resources. I've tried to meet with a lot of the candidates that are running for office to talk to them about housing policy, and that's gone pretty well. But so I'm pretty available right now to meet with people, and I feel like that's part of the work that we're doing is kind of like free consulting around land use issues.
Well, sure, the cities also has a pretty good presence online. Specifically, I'm thinking about your Facebook page. There's a lot of information there.
Yes. And I also organize with a group right now around backyard cottages. So if your listeners are hearing this in the next 3 months in Seattle, spring and summer of 2019, I highly recommend they look to another group that I am involved with called MORE, MOAR, More Options for Accessory Residences. And we will be doing a lot of events around backyard cottages, granny flats, accessory apartments, attic apartments, and helping people understand that there's some changes, small reforms that Councilmember O'Brien is working on, and they've been delayed for 2 years, but we're finally going to move forward. And that's a really exciting option for older folks to age in place. A lot of older folks are looking at it as an ADA accessible option if they put a backyard cottage, and then they can rent out the big house as a source of income. So it's another thing where you were saying earlier, like what could appeal to both renters and homeowners. Backyard cottages is such a good bridge between generations and between kind of different needs for intergenerational living and for folks looking to like supplement their income to pay for property taxes or whatever. It kind of brings together a lot of folks, like environmental folks like Sierra Club and AARP, and like it's kind of folks that maybe some people might see as like unlikely allies. So that's another kind of really positive thing to get involved with around land use right now.
And how can people get involved with Share the Cities?
They can send an email to sharethecities@gmail.com, and we'll add you to our monthly newsletter. You can go on Twitter and see Share the Cities tweeting, which is just right now mostly me tweeting. And then we have a Facebook page, and then we do a lot of our conversations on a Slack channel. Our next meeting is June 23rd, and which is a couple of months away. And yeah, so Share the Cities. Right now, we're doing a lot of listening to the community and reporting back to the community what we heard. So if folks live near 145th, near Jackson Park Golf Course in that community, or near Lake City in 145th, we're going out into the community, talking to like the Holler Lake Community Club, and talking to, there's a Shag apartment building that wants us to come present. So it's kind of like right now we're doing like by request, like meeting people by request and going to where they are in the community to exchange information. Like, hey, we knocked on doors for 5 months. This is what we heard. What do you have to say about that? Kind of like an iterative process, and encouraging folks to connect with the city. The city has a survey right now about future light rail, and so we're kind of like, the city's doing its own engagement, and then we're trying to go places where maybe the city doesn't have like the resources to do the engagement. And we're really looking for somebody who's on the ground working with like communities of color and immigrant communities and renters that we can connect to, like maybe Department of Neighborhood funds or equitable development funds or something, so that they can kind of carry on this work with their neighbors.
Well, I really appreciate that attitude of listening. I think that's one thing we just need desperately in this city more of, is people just sitting down and listening.
And we genuinely want to listen, but because it's so rare, and because we are described urbanists, because we wear that like pro-housing, patch on our sleeve all across the city, when we go to Jackson Park and say we're here to listen, we're here to document, and we're here to do equitable outreach, we have been met with a fair amount of suspicion that that's truly what we're doing, that we don't have some secret agenda, and that we're not secretly being funded by somebody. And like, because people are so not used to hearing like, we're here to listen and like it's a true thing, it's hard to get, it's going to take a while for people to believe that that's really why we're there. Yes, and that doesn't happen fast. And you know, and it is true. We, you know, each of the members of my group do have like, you know, daydreams for 162 acres. What could it be? You know, like a mountain bike course, you know, like wacky future dreams about that land. But like, that's not why we're doing the work. We're doing the work because we are looking at these sound transit infrastructure that's being put in next to a freeway, and no plans during a climate crisis and a housing crisis to have a discussion about, you know, what the right amount of transit-oriented development would be up there to help people drive less and have, you know, be able to access light rail.
Well, if people want to learn more about you or Share the Cities, where should they go?
I think Twitter, Share the Cities would be a good first stop. And again, there's a Facebook page. So if you Google Share the Cities, there's an article that'll pop up from the Urbanist that kind of summarizes who we are, the work we're doing, and how to connect with us there too.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and all of the work that you're doing, and spectacular job talking to all the city council candidates. So.
Well, thank you. You've been listening to Talk to Seattle. I've been your host, Jason Rigden. If you want to support the show, why don't you follow us on social media? We're at Talk to Seattle on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for listening.